Winter 1882 talked in small, sharp ways. Ice ticking on the eaves, the mule's breath hanging white, boots creaking like they meant to split. I lived at the timber's edge with a stove that ate wood and a silence that didn't. Folks say time heals. I learned it just teaches you how to carry. Since Sarah went to ground 5 years back, I kept 4 rules: trap, mend, trade when I must, and step around people like rattlers. The sky was pewter and low. The wind tasted like iron. I kept my mind blank. She lay at the bend where the creek slides under ice. Older, gray hair and strings, skin tight over the kind of bones that outlast weather. An Apache woman, wrapped in torn wool, one hand planted like she meant to rise, and the world vetoed it. She didn't beg. Her eyes followed me, steady as a bead on a rifle that I stood with hands inside my coat, measuring the distance to my cabin. And the distance to trouble. Trouble roots fast when you water it, and I'd sworn off tending anything living. You can't bury what you never let near. Still, her gaze weighed me, not asking, not accusing. A latch slipped inside, and it bothered me to learn the door wasn't barred like I thought. "You got people?" I asked. My voice sounded unused. Her lips were split from cold. "Cold," she said, more breath than word. Cold I could answer. I stripped my blanket and knelt. Snow burned my knees. She let me wrap her without flinch or thanks, just allowing it, like we both understood the ledger. Her pulse hit strong against my fingers. Tough, empty, alive. The cabin sat a mile and change. If she could stand, we could make it. If not, I'd lose hours fetching a sled. I told myself it wasn't my business. Settlements and camps had their own lines. I kept to mine. Then her eyes found mine again, and my rules sounded like excuses you tell a mirror. "Up," I said. I slid an arm under her shoulders. She moved slow, breath hitching, but she moved. When she swayed, I took her weight. She was lighter than she looked, mostly bone and will. The first step was the worst. After that, you put one boot ahead of the last, and don't stop that we made a crooked trail through the pines. The mule snorted. I tied my blanket snug and gave up my scarf so each breath wouldn't cut. My hand stayed on her back, not pushing, just there. She didn't lean, and she didn't pull away. I didn't ask her name. Names invite futures, and I'd lived safe by refusing one. Still, 2 sets of prints made the land look different. The weight I carried shifted. I couldn't tell if it got heavier or lighter. The quiet between us wasn't empty. It was waiting when the roofline showed. She studied it like a scout measuring a ridge, counting door, window, distance to warmth and distance to flight. I opened the latch and let the heat roll out. Fear rose, the old kind. Open your door, let something in, and it can be taken again. I held it anyway. Some rules keep you alive until they start keeping you from living. Fire, I said. Bread, then talk. She gave a small nod. I stepped aside and led her into the one-room life I swore I wouldn't share. Winter paused at the threshold, curious about what I'd chosen. By dusk, her color had returned enough to argue. She ate, then pushed the bowl away. "Tomorrow," she said, touching her chest, pointing west toward the trace to town. I didn't like the road for her, but liking seldom asks us anything. We started at first light. The snow carried if you stepped careful. She walked without complaint, blanket over her shoulders, my scarf tied at her throat. When the cottonwoods opened to a thin meadow, she stopped. Her chin lifted. A sharp, bird-like whistle cut the air. The treeline answered. A figure slid from the pines as if the bark had let her go. Young, maybe 20, hair in 2 braids, cheeks ruddy from cold. Patched doeskin dress, a small bundle. Her eyes took me in the way her mother's had, not fearful, not courting favor. We stood in frost and breath. The older woman spoke low. The girl nodded once and came forward. "Sona," she said, palm to her chest. Then the mother looked at me and added in careful English, "My daughter is perfect for you." My jaw went tight. This country, it makes you see a snare where there ain't one and miss the kind you're already in. The girl watched my face like weather. No flinch, no coyness. "Just sure, ma'am," I said to the older one. "I'm not, whatever you're thinking." She set a hand to her belly and then to her daughter's shoulder. "Safe," she said. "Hearth." The bundle in Sona's arms showed a corner, dried corn, a small knife, a spool of sinew. Not bait. A life reduced to what fits in two hands. I don't take people in, I said, touching an old scar to remember what it cost. Sona's gaze didn't move. I'd seen men look that steady when a horse broke a leg and they meant to do the right thing quick. This wasn't that. This was a choosing. What do you want from me? I asked. Nothing you don't give, Sona said. Her English carried an Apache cadence. You helped my mother. We stand under that choice. The words landed. Without splinters. Somewhere inside my chest, an old hinge flexed and didn't snap that it should have felt like a scheme. It felt like a fact. She wasn't trading need for shelter. She was setting her name level with mine to see if it balanced. The older woman watched us like a judge. I thought of town. Noise, hands that take, talk that bends a story until it fits. What men want. I pictured my cabin, a bed against the east wall, a stove that does its job, space enough to set 3 bowls. Plenty of reasons to refuse. Not one sounded like the man I wanted to die as. My place is that way, I said at last, tipping my hat toward the trees we'd come from. I'm going back. Sona nodded, like I'd solved the first of several problems. The older woman let out a breath that might have been a prayer or just the end of pain held too long. We turned from the road and walked into the cold we all understood. The prints behind us filled with powder as if the world was already willing to forget we'd chosen different. Their steps fell into mine. Not dependent. Accompanying. The meadow narrowed to trail. The trail narrowed to intention. Behind me, Sona hummed a wordless tune, small and unafraid. I kept my eyes forward, and my rules stayed in the willows, where I'd left them. The door closed on the wind, and the room took us in. I shook the fire, coaxed the coals, added 2 splits of pine. Beans and salt pork went to a slow talk with onion and a bay leaf I saved for days that needed mending. Steam gathered on the window pane, blurring the dark. They stood just inside, not touching anything. Sit, I said, laying an old quilt near the stove. The older woman lowered herself with the care of someone who respects her bones. The girl, Sona, folded her legs beside her, hands quiet in her lap. Up close, she was sunbrowned under winter, hair glossy even after travel. I told myself I was taking measure for safety. Truth was, I was remembering how to measure anything but danger. The first bowls went to them. I tore bread and passed it over. The older woman ate steadily, eyes closing after every 3rd spoonful. Sona ate slower, wary of taking more than her share. There's plenty, I said. I cook for a man who forgets he's one. That pulled a small smile. Silence did what talk could have. The stove ticked, snow slid off the roof. The mule stomped and settled. Warmth made a truce. I cleaned the bowls, set water to heat, and brought out a spare pallet and a rolled blanket. Sona shrugged off her doeskin to warm by the stove. That's when I saw them, blue and yellow where the sleeve had slipped, old bruises shaped like the imprecision of men. Another circled her wrist. Not accident. Pattern. She caught me seeing. Her chin lifted, daring me to make a lesson of it. I didn't. Woodpile's light, I said, because sometimes the kindest thing is a task. She followed me to the lean-to, where the air cut clean. We stacked in a small quiet, our breath weaving. She worked like someone told that work made you worth your keep and still deciding if that was true. Back inside, I set tin cups by the stove and poured coffee. The older woman held hers with both hands. She tapped her chest twice, then said a name, Adai. She looked to her daughter. Sona, the girl said again. And then, after a pause, you? Calder, I said, saying it felt like opening a safe you don't trust. Adai nodded, as if a circle had been drawn where there hadn't been one. Night, Adai said, glancing toward the pallet. It wasn't a question. You stay, I told them. My bedroll is fine by the door. No chivalry, just the way a room arranges itself once you decide people aren't a storm to be waited out, but a weather you live in. I banked the fire and hung a blanket across the rafters to give them a shade of privacy. Thank you, Sona said. Careful with the English like a knife you mean to master. I lay with my boots off, listening to 2 breaths join the timber's sigh. Names do a simple thing. They make strangers heavier. I felt it settle, the weight of care. Not the old clamping fear, but something that asked you to stand straighter. The house, which had only ever kept one person, adjusted without complaint. Between awake and sleep, a thought rose. I was no longer the only witness to my life. It spooked me, and it steadied me. Outside, snow began again, neat and anonymous, covering what we brought and what we meant to leave behind. Snow learned the shape of our days and settled into it. Mornings we cracked ice at the trough, checked the snares, split wood. Afternoons we patched what winter worried. Fence, boots, our patience. Sona took to each task like a puzzle with one honest answer. She worked neat and quiet. I tried not to watch more than the work required and failed by small degrees. Adai mended by the stove, humming a tune that seemed to keep the walls standing. On the third morning, with steam climbing from the buckets balanced on her shoulders, I asked what had set her and her mother on the road. I kept my eyes on the axe head I was setting true, so the question wouldn't feel like a hook. She took her time. Shame, she said finally. A word men cook when they are hungry for. Someone's hurt. She set the yoke down, rolled her shoulders. I would not take the husband they chose. I did not smile for the men who looked. Women looked too, because their men's eyes were on me. A boy said I made him wild. His father is a man who does. Not here, no. So they said go. I tightened the wedge and set the head hard. Did you do what they said? No, she answered. Not a tremor on it. Just a fact. I believe you, I said. It wasn't gallantry. It was the line I meant to live on. She studied my face the way she tested a knot, pulling until she trusted it. A small breath left her, not relief so much as recognition. Good, she said. Belief is a roof. It keeps rain off words. We went back to work. I showed her how I stacked wood with the grains set to shed weather. She showed me a knot I'd never used that saves cord and holds like stubbornness. We traded words, her language for mine, mine for hers, naming what the room already knew. Spoon, ash, dawn, river, bread, thunder. Twice she laughed, quick and bright, and it lit corners I'd stopped looking into. Slate, the mule, decided she belonged after she fed him an apple slice and didn't flinch when he tested her with his teeth. Animals judge without gossip. We hit the trap line together. When a fox came up where I hadn't expected one, she skinned it clean, reverent about edges, like someone taught by a mother who loved doing a thing right. Talk in town would say I'd taken a woman to carry the cold out of my bed. Talk is cheap and costs the wrong people. In my house, there were 2 pallets and a blanket hung between them for courtesy. At night, I heard Sona whisper in her tongue and Adai answer in a tone that sounded like blessing and warning braided together. After supper, Sona turned her wrist, so the fire showed a bruise fading from plum to yellow. They said I made men. Look, she said, almost conversational. Men make men look. I carry my body like a bowl. It is mine to carry. You keep it that way, I said. This roof won't ask you to hand it over. She nodded, satisfied we understood the terms. Safety without ownership, work without debt, names spoken without chains. Then she reached for the next chore, because that's how we signed our agreement. In things done right and put away in a quiet that held. In 2 people choosing a plain ethic and letting it prove itself. Night leaned at the window and listened to us breathe. I opened the door to let some heat go and found the air hard with starlight. I stepped out to check the lean-to latch and shake powder off the tarp. The door clicked behind me. Sona stood there with my coat over her shoulders. You should keep that, I said. I've got a back made for weather. She drew it tighter anyway. You are not like them, she said, eyes on the yard I had hammered into a life. The men who see and think taking is the same as seeing. I can be like them if I stop paying attention, I said. I'm learning slow. Her breath smoked. She studied the fence, the mule drowsing in hay, the 2 narrow trails to privy and well. Thank you for believing me, she said, believing. You is the only way to be believed myself, I answered. I carried a lie about what I could survive. It made me smaller than the ground I stood on. She looked at me then, not sideways but full in the face like a person choosing another person. I was not safe, she said. I will not belong to the ones who broke safety to make room for their hands. I will belong where I choose. She stepped closer so the coat brushed my knuckles. I choose to stand next to you now. The want that had been pacing my chest went quiet, listening. My body remembered it could be gentle. Then stand, I said, and the words were steadier than the feeling behind them. She set her palm to my jaw, thumb rough from cord work. Her hand was warm from the coat. She rose onto her toes and kissed my cheek, not shy and not a promise, just a single true note long enough to tune a life. Heat climbed my throat, and I let it. 5 winters of numbness loosened like ice breaking off a river rock that I did not pull her in. I did not explain anything to death. I just breathed with her, shoulder to shoulder under a sky that had watched men do worse and better. When she stepped back the place her hand had been kept speaking, inside, Adai stirred, her cough a small tearing cloth. Sona listened, the way care turns first toward its oldest debt. I will make her tea, she said. I'll bank the fire, I told her. We went in. The room met us with beans and wood smoke and something new that had not been invited but took its seat anyway. An ease I remembered from the first years I knew Sarah, before the world measured what it could take. As Sona bent over her mother, I set water to boil and cut a strip of cloth for steeping pine needles. Adai's eyes opened. They moved from her daughter's face to mine and back, a single trip that included judgment and mercy. She touched Sona's wrist, then made a small motion like laying something down. I didn't know the word she spoke, but I knew the shape of it. Permission. We drank the sharp green tea. Heat returned to 3 sets of hands. Later I dragged the blanket across the rafters for privacy and lay with my back to the door the way a dog sleeps when he has chosen a home. Adai's breath thinned over the next 2 days. Winter strips a life to clear lines. Fire, water, medicine, hands. We did what hands can. Sona brewed willow for pain, rubbed grease into ribs, spoke in their tongue in a voice like dusk. I kept the fire steady and made broth. Waiting filled the cabin. Before dawn on the 3rd day, Adai's eyes opened clear. She reached, found my sleeve, tugged me close. Calder, she said. She set Sona's hand in mine and pressed, then touched 2 fingers to Sona's temple. A charge given plain. See her. Keep her from being alone without taking her from herself. I said. Sona leaned so their foreheads met and sang one verse, low. I stepped outside and let the sky hear it. The sun came up thin. When I went back in, Adai had gone where the old go when winter asks. Sona folded her mother's hands, wrapped her in the quilt she had mended, and sat upright. Grief didn't wring her, it filled her. I put on coffee and didn't speak. Ground. This time of year fights you. I took spade and picked to a patch behind the cottonwoods where wind drops and soil holds. Frost gave grudgingly. Each strike rang through my arms. The hole was square and true, more careful than most things I'd done since I hammered Sarah's name into a cross. Sona came out with a small bundle. Cornmeal, sweetgrass, a bead string bright as a pomegranate's heart. She set each on the quilt and spoke words I didn't know. I lowered the body with a strength I wished I didn't still have. Sona's hands guided the corners like fitting a child to a cradle. We stood with our hats off, while the air bit our ears. Sona shook cornmeal into the grave, then pinched sweetgrass to smoke, fanning the scent to the edges of the world. I said, a prayer that didn't step on hers. Snow began while I set the first spade of dirt. Sona took a turn with the shovel, steady, not rushing, the last work you can do for a life. I laid stones until the mound held. She pressed her palm to the top and left a print the wind would keep for a while. Then she wiped her face with the heel of her hand and breathed once, like someone coming up from deep water. Inside, I hung her mother's dress by the stove to dry. Sona sat on the floor, knees up, gathered but not collapsed. I gave her tea in the room. When the crack in her voice came, it wasn't a break. It was a door opening to where she kept the ache. She leaned toward me. I set my palm between her shoulder blades and didn't move it. Night asked for lamps. We lit 2. Sona spoke of stitches and recipes and how Adai's hands tested a quilt for warmth like checking a child for fever. She did not make her mother a saint. She made her a person, Before sleep, Sona took my hand. "You are not a wall I hide behind," she said. "You are a road I can walk beside." I strung the blanket across the rafters again. She rolled to her pallet and I to mine. But when the dark turned heavy, she moved to the space beside me and rested her forehead on my shoulder. Not asking, not promising, just placing weight where it could be held. That we slept. Outside, new snow covered the stones and made the yard quiet. Grief makes a room new. After washing dirt from our wrists, the house felt wider, like it had been holding its breath. I brewed coffee strong. Sona stood at the stove in one of my shirts, sleeves rolled twice. It was a plain sight and also a door, life not borrowed. We kept quiet. She ate a heel of bread, set the rest back like saving faith for morning. When I reached for the axe, she touched my forearm. "Sit," she said, neither order nor plea, just putting a chair down in a road I would have walked past. We faced each other like carpenters fitting a joint. "I am not broken," she said. "I am tired. I want safety that is not a cage. Belonging that is not a debt. I will not be owned by rules or by pity. A knot loosened under my ribs. I don't want to own anything that breathes," I said. "Not even myself, most days." She smiled with half her mouth. "Good. Then we try." Lamplight drew a narrow line across her cheekbone. "I choose you for now. Not because there is nowhere else. Because here is right. Not a vow, just a gate swung and the hinges checked." I offered what I could without lying. Ground fenced, roof kept, a patient mule, 2 hands that show up at dawn. "And I'll pay attention," I said. "When a man stops paying attention, he turns into the kind you ran from." She reached and took my hand, palm smooth in the center, calloused at the edges. We didn't cling like drowning folk. We balanced like walkers. With a long road. She set my hand to her jaw and came in slow, giving time to change a mind, and pressed her mouth to mine. Not hunger, not testing, a joining you could breathe during. When we broke, she rested her forehead to mine. "Tonight," she said, "I want to sleep in your bed. I want warmth. I want to hear the stove and your breath and not listen for the door. I do not want to be touched for wanting that alone." "Yes," I said, surprised by the ease of it. "Come sleep." We hung the blanket anyway. Privacy is a kindness even in a room that forgives. She blew the lamp and slid under my quilts. I kept my shirt on, not for shyness, for respect of the space she'd named. In the dark, her hand found my ribs and stopped there, the way you steady yourself before a step. We lay in a quiet that didn't need guarding. I woke once to her breath change. "You awake?" I whispered. "Yes," she said. "And safe." Morning doesn't care about declarations. Still, when I rose and saw her braid loose on my pillow, steadiness came back like a muscle remembering its job. We hadn't promised forever. We had chosen again. That felt like the honest shape of it. We ate, washed bowls, stepped into the yard. The sky was hard blue, the color winter saves for people who did their grieving right. She studied the garden plot under snow. "When the ground softens, I will plant beans," she said. "I'll build a fence that tells dear polite lies." I said. She laughed. The sound went up like smoke and didn't vanish. Winter loosened its teeth. The yard turned to ruts, then to mud. We worked in shirt sleeves at noon and in coats by dusk. Sona kept my shirt, mending a tear at the cuff like promising the day a second chance. She woke slower now, one hand low on her belly before she stood, as if checking a lantern's fuel that we didn't circle it long. One morning, while I planed a board for a cradle I pretended was a tool chest, she set my hand where hers had rested. The quiet under my palm felt like something deciding whether to be thunder. She washed my face like weather, ready to accept, not demand. "All right," I said. "We'll build gentle." I sanded until the board shone and felt the river inside. "We find a new course." Over stew she asked about permissions. "Your church? Your judge?" she said. "My people have laws too. All can be used to make a woman small." "They can," I said. "But a fence is honest if you build it yourself. And it keeps what you mean to keep." I brought down a wrapped bundle I hadn't opened in years. A plain ring I'd hammered from a silver coin the winter after Sarah died. When metal and fire were the only language I could speak without bleeding, that I set it on the table. Not a claim, I said. A marker. A way for the world to read what we already know. Sona turned it in her fingers. Does it belong to a ghost? It belongs to whoever I give it to, I said. If that's you and if you want it. She slid it on. First the thumb to test the snug, then her ring finger where it sat a little loose, as if the future had left room. I accept, she said. No borrowed ceremony. Just two people agreeing to keep each other warm without owning each other's air, but we mark the day by work. I finished the cradle sides, pine ready to learn. The song of sleeping. She traced the garden and named the crops that answer spring with kindness. Beans, corn, squash. Stakes went in like boundary and blessing both. By the creek, we cut willow with enough bend for rockers. I shaved them thin. She rubbed them with tallow until they shone. When I fitted the runners and saw the cradle take its first sway, something in my chest matched it, motion without leaving. That night, Sona laid her palm across mine, comparing scars. We have enough past to share, she said. We will not trade it like knives. She rested in the crook of my arm and listened to the stove breathe. I let the quiet say what it meant. Not rescue, not bargain, not penance. Just a life, chosen and kept. Come thaw, green stitches closed winter's wound. We stacked stones around Adai's mound. Sona braided sweetgrass and tied it there so the wind would remember. When the cradle stood finished, she laid her hand in it, not rocking, just testing the weight of hope. It held that I don't know what. The law would call us. I know what the house does. It knows 3 breaths and a 4th on the way. It knows a ring catching lamplight while beans simmer, and a hoe by the door like a promise you mean to keep. It knows that when a woman says, I choose, and a man answers, so do I, winter steps back and lets them through.